John's gospel said this act in Cana of Galilee was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory. Isn't that like fun? If you didn't know this is the series that we're watching together as a congregation on Wednesday nights called The Chosen. I'm very thankful for the production of this thing. It portrays Jesus more beautifully than I've ever seen him portrayed anywhere before. John's gospel says this was the beginning of God's glory being revealed. Friends, I want to suggest today that the wedding miracle at Cana was about more than just wine. This party that was held by our Jewish ancestors, this party, this celebration was held in a moment of time when our Jewish ancestors were under the crushing military control of the Roman Empire. It was held at a time when the Jewish people were considered with utter disdain by the government. This party was held in a moment when the Jewish people themselves were living in a highly polarized, conflicted time, when their own people groups, their own tribes were continuously conflicted and at odds with each other. The Pharisees versus the Sadducees, the Essenes who had booked it and left town, to the litigiousness of the Sanhedrin. The contention and the rivalry among their own people easily mirrors our own, and yet our ancestors knew how to party. This was the beginning of God's glory being revealed. And John goes on to say, and because of this, Jesus' disciples believed in him. Didn't that look like a fun thing to be a part of? Open your Bibles, if you would, to Luke chapter 15. I just want to give you a heads up. We're probably going to be in here till about 12:07 today. So just settle in for just a couple minutes. Just don't let that alarm go off. Luke chapter 15 is where I want you to go. This act in Cana of Galilee was the first glimpse of God's glory in Jesus. It was this celebration in the midst of oppression and conflict and contention and cantankerous, polarized infighting among their own people. I love it that Jesus' mom said, if not now, when? When is the right time to celebrate? If not now. Friends, today we're concluding a series that we've been in for 9 weeks now. So this is part 9 of a series that we've been exploring this proposition made by John Tyson. The proposition is this: if the American church is going to be a vibrant, healthy, compelling kind of community, where the dead come back to life again and those who couldn't see get new vision, if we're going to be a compelling presence in the culture, then we have to awaken and adjust some of our fundamental ideas about what it is to be a Jesus follower. That we've got to reconfigure what it even means to be a faith community. We got to do some recalculating, as my GPS says when I get off track. Recalculating. It's time for the church to do some recalculating to figure out how we can be the people of God in a world that is conflicted and cantankerous and polarized and oppressed. And how can we do this? So we spent 7 weeks talking about specific strategies that would be required of me and of you if we're going to be those people in the world, if we're going to be the kind of people that change the world, to be the light of the world, then these are some of the things that would be required of us. Number 1, our worship has to resist idolatries. You and I, we have a lot of aspirations, a lot of goals, a lot of dreams, a lot of hobbies, a lot of things we want to do. But worship is that one thing every week where we say, all of those things matter, but God is most important. And I set aside every other thing to worship God at least 1 hour a week. Not a lot to ask, right? Our worship has to resist the idolatries all around us. Second, we looked next week at how our rest must resist exhaustion. Some of us come crashing down on the last day of the week exhausted. Sabbath is the command to rest before you get exhausted. You work from rest. Workism is now America's fastest growing favorite new form of atheism. We just got to work. We've got to work. Rest has to resist that notion. We have to work all the time. Week number 3, our hunger must resist our apathy. We talked about how our continual commitment to physical contentment and comfort starves us from hungering for spiritual vitality. We're just so interested to make sure that we're comfortable that we never get to the place of some longing, physical longing, existential longing. The scripture often points out that longing, the emptiness, translates into spiritual vitality and life. Fasting can lead to breakthrough in spiritual vitality. We've got to be people who can figure this out a little bit differently. The next week we looked at how our hospitality must resist fear. We live in a world that is very diverse, all kinds of people. It's always been that way in this country. Zach taught us a few weeks ago about how our robust, loving kindness is the thing that will help us heal the fractures in the world and build new bridges to new kinds of people and new kinds of relationships. Our hospitality is this like golden opportunity to resist fear of everybody who's different than you and me. We've got to be those people. Next, we looked at how our honor must resist contempt. Tyson says that contempt is perhaps the most toxic force eroding God's people today. That the toxicity of our contempt lies in the fact that we just devalue others by default. If they vote different than we do, we just devalue them. And when we don't honor them, and Jesus' followers, we must honor people, not have contempt for them. Next, we looked at how our, how did this go? How our love must resist hate. This is the big bowl of spinach in the New Testament. It usually appeals only to the more mature palates. But we've got to be people that love our neighbors, not have hatred or contempt for them, or we don't dismiss them. Next, we looked at how our sacrifice must resist privilege. I told you, I have access to 10 showers. If my power goes out, within a mile of my house, 10 showers, instant access. And after worship last week, a couple of you said, hey, I have one. You come to my house too. That makes 12 or 14. I have access to all of these showers, not because I earned them, not because I deserve them. I just happen to live in a world and in a life story that's pretty privileged. I have access to all these things, and I'm not ashamed. Because shame isn't God's desire. It's what I do with my privilege. I voluntarily and sacrificially redistribute it for the aliveness of others. Why? Because that's what Jesus did. There's never been anybody in history more privileged at birth than Jesus. But Jesus, though being equal with God, did not consider equality with God something to be exploited. Instead, he what? He emptied himself, so that others like us could be made more alive. We've covered that ground in the last 9 weeks. Today we're going to conclude this by looking at this final idea, and that is that our celebration must resist cynicism. And some of you are thinking, celebration. Who does he think he is? Does he not know that we're in a pandemic? Does he not know that we've had political polarization that we haven't had in 100 years? How can we possibly celebrate? I think I'm going to be able to make a case that we celebrate because Jesus celebrated. We celebrate because the Bible, believe it or not, tells us 50 times almost that you have to celebrate. If not now, when? Luke 15 is where I want you to have your finger in your Bible, but I want to take a little time to get there answering this question about cynicism. Has anybody noticed that there seems to be like more cynicism in the world right now than there might have been 5 years ago or 25 years ago? More cynicism. Are you noticing any more cynicism inside of you, inside of me? A little more cynicism. What is cynicism, you ask? Well, the definition of cynicism, next slide, is this. an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest or skepticism. I'm skeptical about you. Some of us just seem to kind of live in a place of skepticism. I'm doubtful about everything. Or another definition, Merriam-Webster says this: cynicism is the belief that people are generally selfish and dishonest. Ooh, friends, if you live life with those lenses, I want to invite you to put those lenses down and try on some different ones. If we're living in the land of cynicism, oh, I'm so sorry. There's reason to celebrate. In a book that I learned about this week, written by a workplace expert named Jennifer Moss. The book is called The Burnout Epidemic, and it came out, I think, in September. And Moss's attempt is to address what's now being called the Great Resignation. Have you heard about this? The Great Resignation, where millions of U.S. workers are now burned out and they're leaving the workplace in numbers that we've never seen before. And so Moss is attempting to kind of explain what may be happening in the workplaces around the United States. Moss says that it was very helpful that in 2019, the World Health Organization, or WHO, defined burnout, gave us a working definition of burnout that's really contributing to what's happening right now. Burnout, as defined by the WHO, is the result of unsustainable workloads or unmanaged stress at work. Unsustainable workloads or unmanaged stress at work are contributing to this thing called burnout. How many of you would say that you've had a bit of unsustainable workload or unmanaged stress at work? We just live in a pool. I got both of those things. Yeah, we live in a pool where those things seem to be like the water we live in. Moss identifies what she would consider to be 3 signs that you are on the path to burnout. Number 1, she would say, is exhaustion. Exhaustion is the thing that makes you feel unmotivated or disinterested. Exhaustion is the thing that makes you say, whenever somebody asks you how you're doing, the answer is, I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. And I get that. Have you been tired in the last year? Yeah. But if that has become your life mantra, then you're probably in a place of exhaustion where Sabbath might be a helpful experiment. Exhaustion. Number 2, she said, is disengagement. This is emotional distance from others. How many of you have gotten a lot more distant from people in the last 20 months? Distance seems to be the kind of thing that a pandemic lockdown could actually contribute to, the distancing that we now have experienced. If we're under quarantine for endless amounts of time, this distance that we have might be saving our lives, but it's also probably contributing to the disengagement that we're having with each other. And then her 3rd sign towards burnout is this attitude of cynicism. This is the attitude that says, it's never going to get any better. People are terrible. We're just in this. It's just going to be stuck like this. It's kind of a fatalistic approach. It's just, things are just as they are. I've heard it said sometimes, that's just real life, preacher. You can talk about goodness and hope and life and new vision and new sight, but I'm just going to tell you about the real world. That's the code language for things are bad. I get it that things are bad, but you know what, friends? Things are not worse now than they were on the day of the wedding at Cana in Galilee. And our ancestors, they knew how to party in the midst of a time that is tiresome and hard. They knew that because they had good instructions on how to party that had been given to them for hundreds of years before that. How many of you knew that the Bible is like the guide on how to party? It's true, Chase. You tell your parents, what I learned today in church? Pastor Lance taught us how to party. He said we have to party harder. We have to party better, that we're not very good at it. And so here's how we do it. All right, but let me ask a couple of questions first here. Am I right that it could be that Christians are actually just as cynical as everybody else. How? I don't know. I think maybe some Christians are really super cynical. And so how did we become the people who don't know how to party, but instead we're just kind of committed to cynicism? The world's terrible. I'm tired. We're distanced from each other. And I want to offer this as one possibility. I have two interesting theories I've been working on all week, but I don't have time to tell you about them. One of them is this notion that I think comes from the stream into which we were born. If you were like me, you were born into a tribe that was shaped by puritanical Protestantism, and Baptists are an offspring of that tribe. So I didn't grow up Baptist, but that's the tribe nonetheless, shaped by this puritanical Protestant kind of mindset. And what I see in that is that as Puritans, we basically had contempt for anything fun and anything festive, or anyone who was frivolous or undisciplined. We had contempt for them from the get-go, and so we never learned how to party well. We never learned, like, how do you do this thing called partying? And instead, we made some really interesting kind of interpretations of things in life. For instance, how many of you grew up in a house where dancing was forbidden? And none of you are going, I want to be that guy. No, but that's part of our history, is this notion that dancing is forbidden. And part of that comes, I think, from this notion that dancing is inappropriate because it's erotic. All dancing is inappropriate, it's erotic. And that kind of led to this stigmatization of our bodies, where our bodies are naughty. And then on top of that, we piled everything Paul said about the dangers of the flesh, and we just kept piling it on that. So we've ended up with this idea about our bodies that they're not good, that our flesh is bad. Now, Paul said that a few times, but I'll tell you this, Jesus never ever said flesh is bad. He never said there was something wrong with flesh. In fact, he took it on. And then when we killed him in it, he took it on again. There's something about enfleshment that's good. So, but as a Puritan, I got this idea somewhere in my head that dancing is evil. So I've got an unhealthy idea about dancing that's just kind of in the thing. I hadn't thought through it very well. Another one is drinking alcohol. Alcohol, in some tribes, is just equated with drunkenness and debauchery. It can lead to drunkenness and debauchery, but not all alcohol equates drunkenness and debauchery. But much like sex and death, we didn't talk about those things in healthy kinds of ways, so we adopted some really interesting interpretations about dancing and about alcohol that left them in places that are not redemptive kinds of ways of talking about things. We just said, no, I'm just going to be away from them, which this is maybe a safe strategy unless it leads you to not being able to celebrate. Now, I want to suggest that alcohol and dancing are not required components of celebration. John chapter 2 notwithstanding.
But they help.
This was the beginning of God's glory being revealed. I want to not be too frivolous here. I'm not saying that dancing and drinking has to be a part of things to celebrate, but I am saying that maybe we need to rethink some of the things that has kept us from being able to celebrate at all, because we've inherited these taboos and these stigmatisms about our body and about drink. I think that's part of why we're not known as the people who know how to party very well. I think there's a second reason. I don't have time to talk about this, but I think some of it is our conception of Jesus. Like, how do we conceive of the leader of our movement? Do we consider him to be kind of a melancholic, empty? I tell you, I've got some pictures. Can we put those pictures up there? What is your picture of Jesus? Is it sad-faced Jesus? Like, oh, that would be good. Or is it the guy who knows how to laugh? Is it the guy who knows how to tease Andrew about having donkey feet when he dances because he... How do you think of your Lord in the flesh? Yeah, how do you conceive of him? Which one of these guys is the one that said, "Oh, I've come not to condemn, but to rescue humanity"? Which one is the one that Paul says that he came not counting people's sins against them, but giving people reconciliation with God and then giving people the ministry of reconciliation of other people? Which one of those guys is the reconciler, the reuniter, divinity, humanity, people, humanity together? Which one of those people is the one who came about, as Luke records him as saying, "I came, the Spirit's on me, I came to proclaim good news to the captives and the oppressed. I came to proclaim new insight to those who can't see a future. I came to proclaim the year of God's favor on humanity." Which of those guys came to proclaim good news? Friends, if your conception of Jesus is a sourpuss, then you're probably not wired to party and you may need some help. Chase, you got your Bible? The Bible is the party manual. Yeah? Friends, I have good news for you. And slide-wise, this may go back a bit. Yeah, we live in a time that's cantankerous. We live in a time that's cynical, I think. We live in a time that doesn't know how to party. We're not very good at partying, maybe. And that is pretty crummy. But I have good news for you, and this is a little bit of a challenge. You know what Jesus said to you? You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. If the world is going to get better, who's got to lead the way in partying? We do, yeah? All right, so I'm going to make a super sprint through a couple of things that you can write these down and go back and look later. But I hold out that this book actually is a great guide to teach us how to party biblically. I'm going to start on page 1 with how do we party the way God would party? Well, you just look at God partying right from the beginning. You know what God says in his first vocal words that we'll say? He looks. What's it? It's good. Hey, you know what else? This is good too. Look at this. Look, this? Oh, very good. Everything God looks at hand is like good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's very good. That's a entity who knows how to party. He's recorded saying it's good. Everything's not bad. There are some bad things. There's still darkness out there, but it's good. Job, in the book of Job, the one that everyone's known for partying, right, Job? God gives a little commentary to Job on the creation, saying something like, yeah, there was loud music and there was lots of singing and maybe there was even dancing, who knows? In Job, God says this to Job, "Where were you, sourpuss Job, when I laid the creation's cornerstone and the morning stars sang together and all of the heavenly beings shouted for joy?" Does that sound like a pretty good place to be? Yeah, that's the opening chapter of the story of creation. It's good, it's good, it's very good, especially you. Very good. All right, but we got to go forward here. I told you 12:07. Let's say 12:17. Let's move forward here. You know the next party book? Deuteronomy. Of course you say. Deuteronomy would be where I'd go to party. Deuteronomy is the book of God's people being reminded before they go into the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. These are the things you need to remember on how to live every day. This is how you marry. This is how you bury them. This is how you pray. This is how you live. This is how you do your crops. And this is how you tithe. I want to tell you this, the tithing chapter is it's how to party. You're saying, oh, how's that? I don't know if I even like tithe. Well, Deuteronomy 14, flip it over there if you want to, or just write it down and go back and look at it later. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, God tells God's people how to tithe, and this is like cause for partying. Now, keep in mind, in Deuteronomy, Israel is an agrarian society. They don't get instant paychecks deposited to their account electronically. God's provision comes in the form of like flocks and crops, right? So when they tithe out of their crops and flocks. Well, sometimes, especially if they had an abundant year, the tithe may be too big to bring to the worship gathering. So God gives them this little accommodation. Set apart a tithe of all the yield of your seed that is brought in yearly from the field, in the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose as a dwelling for his name. You shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, as well as the firstlings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if, when the Lord your God has blessed you, the distance is so great that you're unable to transport it all, because the place where your Lord your God will choose to set up his name is too far away from you, then you may turn it into money. So cash in your tithe into money and take your money in your pocket to the place of worship. And then what do? You pull it out And you put your tithe in the plate or whatever for the community of people, and here's what you do with it. Next slide. With the money secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Spend the money for whatever you wish. Oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever you desire. And you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your household rejoicing together. Because these are instructions you've got to celebrate. How? Here's some instructions. Deuteronomy. Chase, that's your code. How do I party? Deuteronomy 14 is the guide. Yeah? You got that? Super. Moving forward. If I had more time, I would do more of this. Nehemiah is a big party book. Nehemiah? 50 years Israel had been in Babylonian exile. Talk about hard times. Over time, the king of Babylon sent Jews back to Jerusalem to be in rebuilding. First batch came back, they rebuilt the temple. Second batch came back, they rebuilt the community according to Torah. And the third batch that came back, they were to rebuild the wall. All of those initiatives kind of worked, but utterly the thing failed. Why? Because the people failed to celebrate. In Nehemiah chapter 8, you come and say, hey, you're crying every time somebody reads the word of the Lord to you. Why are you crying? Quit your crying. There's no crying in Christianity. No, he didn't say that. There's no crying. You've got to rejoice. So the command, I don't have time to read it, but the command is you've got to party. In fact, through the whole of the Old Testament, said 50 times, there's a command that you have to celebrate. And I would just ask the question of Mary, if not now, when? We got to party. All right, let's fast forward to the very end. New Testament. Zach read it beautifully. There are all these religious people that come to Jesus. Sinners, tax collectors, Pharisees, Sadducees, they all come. And what are they doing? They're grumbling. And that's terrible commentary. The religious people come and they're the grumblers. So they come and you know what Jesus does? He tells them a trio of stories. You know what the theme of all those stories is? Rejoicing. The message seems to be something like this. The kingdom of God is way more about rejoicing over the one good thing than it is over grumbling or discontent or indifference about all the other things. The first story, you know, the woman lost her sheep. One sheep, she has 99 good ones, but she lost one. So she goes out and she finds the one. And what are the instructions when she finds the one? Rejoice over the 1%. 99% didn't need anything, but it's worth rejoicing over the one. How many of us rejoice over the 1% of good things that are happening in the world? Second story, a woman loses what? A little coin. Just a tiny little coin is lost. Maybe under here. She looks, not there. She sweeps the floor, looks under the rug. When she finds that one tiny little coin, what does she do? Party time! Time to rejoice. What, over one little coin? Yeah, I know it's small, but it is worth looking under the rug. It's worth sweeping the floor and moving the furniture to find one thing that you can celebrate. There's more celebration in heaven over one lost thing found, over one thing that turns, than there is any kind of weeping over anything that's not going well. There's more rejoicing in God's kingdom. Barbara said a moment ago, she taught the children, anytime some one of us turns to God, there's a party in heaven. You and I pray that God's kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven. So what would heaven look like if we're participating in the way of God? It might look like donkeys dancing on hot coals if it's me and you, because I'm not a good dancer. But it would certainly not look morose all the time. It wouldn't look heavy all the time. It would be more than I'm tired and exhausted. It would be a festivity. It would be celebration. So let me close with this. There's more, but I don't have time. I got a party to go to downstairs. Musicians, would you come? We're gonna end this thing in a party. Rejoice with me. The Father says we have to celebrate. We have to rejoice. We have to celebrate. Friends, if we are going to change the world, if we're going to be a compelling presence where others find aliveness, we have to party. We have to celebrate. I would remind us of Jesus, who, next slide, I think this is the last slide here. He said, this act in Cana in Galilee, it was the first sign that Jesus gave. The first glimpse of his glory, and what? And his disciples believed in him. If we want the world to think the church has anything to offer, we've got to know how to celebrate. If you want people to believe that Jesus is good news, then we've got to embody the good news. I know we're not so good at it, and I know it's a tired year, but let's stand up, shall we? We're going to dance just a little bit, if we can. Celebration, dance party. Yeah, Nicole, you're there, sister. So would you lead us in a little celebrating?